The Battle of Sidi Bou Zid, narrated by Sasha Maggio. Disclaimer. I may or may not get the pronunciation right for every person and location. Bear with me, I'm doing my best. Also, when I typed that, this slide design was suggested in PowerPoint, so guess what? I'm using it. The third Why We Fight 1943 podcast episode features Dr. Mark Calhoun, and he takes us through the story of this German offensive in February 1943, beginning with the Battle of Sidi Bou Zid and into Kasserine Pass. So this is a primer to help make the most of that episode. As noted in the last two Twitter threads, From Torch to Tunisia, parts 1 and 2, the Allies failed to take Tunis after heading east, immediately following the landings of Operation Torch in November of 1942, and the major action more or less stalled in Tunisia. The Axis forces controlled most of Tunisia until late 1942, when the Allies were able to capture a portion, the eastern dorsal, of the Atlas Mountains and hold on to it. The U.S. Second Corps, along with a French corps, the 19th Corps, held this eastern dorsal. The Second Corps commander, Lieutenant General Friedendahl, set up a headquarters in Tebessa, which probably wasn't ideal considering Tebessa was about 80 miles behind them, and once there, Lieutenant General Friedendahl rarely visited the front that they had established. In the 1930s, the French set up a defensive line of fortifications in Tunisia to protect from a potential invasion by Mussolini's forces. This was named the Mareth Line, as it occupied an area that included a point where routes converged heading toward Mareth, between Gabas and Madinine. By January 1943, Rommel and his combined German-Italian forces were around this Mareth line, while General Arnim, in command of the 5th Panzer Army, had been conducting smaller attacks in late 1942 and early 1943 to keep the Allied forces from gaining any real ground. These German, Italian, and Axis forces under Rommel and Arnim met up, and in this area near Sidi Bou Zid, there were elements from both sets of forces, including Afrika Korps' 21st Panzer Division and the 5th Panzer Army's 10th Panzer Division. Lacking any real intelligence on the intentions of those Axis commanders, Friedendahl spread out his forces with the hope of being able to fend off any potential attacks. But by doing this, his units were a bit too far from each other to be of any real help should something arise. At Sidi Bou Zid, against the judgment of his subordinate commanders, Friedendahl tasked the 34th Infantry Division's 168th Regimental Combat Team and the 1st Armored Division's Combat Command Alpha with defending the city. To that end, the forces were positioned on raised islands, which will ultimately set them up for failure. Fearing that the Americans and Allies might launch an attack from the eastern dorsal, which was held by the U.S. Second Corps and French 19th Corps forces, Rommel ordered Arnim to attack at the Faid Pass, about 12 miles northeast of Sidi Bou Zid, on 30 January 1943. French 19th Corps forces were holding the Faid Pass, but they were relatively under-equipped. General Arnim attacked the French positions around the eastern dorsal, and despite their fierce resistance, he captured the Faid Pass that day. The French commander had attempted to reach Lieutenant General Friedendahl to get help sent from the U.S. Second Corps, but the Panzer Division was fast, and American decisions were slow. Suffering many casualties, the French 19th Corps was forced to give up the Faid Pass. Now the Faid Pass was in Axis hands, with the American forces split between two hills to defend Sidi Bou Zid and Friedendahl far from the front. The mission of the Axis forces was to cut through the dorsals, continue northward to the Mediterranean, isolating the Allied forces facing Tunis and Bizerta. The 10th Panzer Division was to attack Sidi Bou Zid directly through Faid Pass. The 21st Panzer would emerge from Maizila Pass, swing around the U.S. positions at Sidi Bou Zid, and strike from the rear. On February 14, 1943, 80 years ago, 4 battle groups consisting of about 140 tanks from the German 10th Panzer Division and 21st Panzer Division rushed through Faid Pass and Maizila Pass toward Sidi Bou Zid under the cover of a sandstorm around 4 a.m. By 10 a.m., the Axis commander sent half his forces to each of the 2 hills, fighting off American resistance. One of the hills was encircled, and among those captured was Lieutenant Colonel John K. Waters, Patton's son-in-law. By the end of the day, most of the American fighting vehicles had been driven west or destroyed, leaving infantrymen atop the hills with no support. A counterattack was launched on 15 February by American General Orlando Ward. They suffered great casualties in the face of German aircraft strafing and bombing, and then German tank attacks. At the cost of 46 medium tanks, 9 self-propelled guns, and a number of other vehicles, the Americans captured Jebel el-Hamra. I think it's circled on this map based on the associated number, but I could not find a map that was already labeled. The following quotes are from Tunisia, a U.S. Army Center of Military History publication. While Eisenhower struggled to contain squabbles on the Allied side, the Germans refueled their tanks and continued west. On the 14th, they hit Sidi Bou Zid, 10 miles beyond Faid. With over 200 tanks on both sides, a huge, drawn-out battle appeared in the making. But American armor was spread too thin, and the panzers punched through in only one day. An ineffective counterattack the next day and the stunning capture of some 1,400 troops forced the Americans to undertake a major withdrawal. As the 1st Armored Division fell back, enemy pressure eased. On the 16th, the panzers resumed their westward push, seizing Spatla 25 miles beyond Sidi Bou Zid. Again, the Americans scrambled back to establish a new defensive position, this time at Kasserine Pass. 4 days of successive defeats cost Second Corps dearly. The Americans had lost 2,546 people, 103 tanks, 280 vehicles, 18 field guns, 3 anti-tank guns, and 1 anti-aircraft battery. Even service and medical companies, miles behind the infantry and armor units, had been reached by the onrushing panzers. The succession of Second Corps defeats did not end with the loss of Spatla. Rommel saw the opportunity to keep his battered adversary reeling, with a push for an even bigger prize, Kasserine Pass, gateway to Algeria. Several of the pictures and images used throughout this presentation come from the book World War II, Map by Map. Many of the images in this presentation come from publications released by the U.S. Army Center of Military History or Army University Press. These 3 documents are available online as part of a collection to support Kasserine Pass staff rides. The book Tunisia and the book Northwest Africa, Seizing the Initiative in the West are also available online, as is the old CSI Battlebook for the Battle of Sidi Bou Zid. All of these documents will be linked in the description box below. Thank you for joining me today. The references included in the Twitter thread presented here are linked below in the description. If you are a fan of this content, please consider subscribing to my accounts on any or all platforms, as that helps me know the content is worth the effort. Check out motheroftanks.com for details and links to all content. And don't forget the series podcast, which will feature many brilliant guests throughout the year. And stick around. This will be the best series yet.